Mr. Gyamfi, so this verdict is a verdict on all governments, and of course, the MPP came into power just after you have left. And that verdict says that you've all run the economy like a Ponzi scheme and that you've been borrowing when you really do not have the means to service it, only to go back and borrow some more. You service the debt, and then you use it to pay uh, services that you really do not need because of lack of prioritization. Do you concede your part in what he calls the mess that we currently find ourselves in?
I think that, first of all, it's important to put this matter in the right context. You see, in principle, every government, and for that matter, every country, must live within its means. It's just like a human being. To be productive, you need to live within your means. You cannot be earning, for example, 10,000 cedis a month and be spending 20,000 cedis every month. If you do that, you're going to be incurring a lot of debt, and you will have to borrow to service that debt. And so, in principle, Kwaku Kwarteng's argument is valid. And that is the argument we in the NDC have been making for a very long time, that this Akufo-Addo Bawumia NPP government must learn to live within its means, and that a reckless expenditure which led to excessive borrowing since 2017 was going to crash our economy. We sounded alarm bells, we advised the government, and they refused to listen. And that is why today we find our economy in the mess, we are all witnessing today. So the principle of this argument is correct, and it is not different at all from what we in the NDC have been saying since 2017. In fact, it is a no-brainer. Every student of economics knows that, and all the economic watchers knew that our economy was going to crash as a result of the reckless spending and excessive borrowing of the Bawumia-led economic management team. The problem with what Honorable Kwaku Kwarteng has put out is the generalization of his caution or criticism.
It doesn't apply to the NDC's administration?
Everybody in this country knows that what Kwaku Kwarteng is saying has to do with the current Akufo-Addo Bawumia government. Everybody knows that he's not happy. And he's not been happy with the mismanagement of this economy by his own party for a very long time. It is the reason why he's being sacked as the chairman of the Finance Committee in Parliament, because he was perceived as a stumbling block to the tax exemptions that this government has been trying to push through, and he's been against many of the bad policies that his own party has been taking, which is what has plunged us into the excruciating ashes and the mess we find ourselves in. That is commendable on his part. But what is unacceptable is for him to generalize the failings of his own party, his own government.
But Sammy Gyamfi, let me read to you a part of what he says here and see if it didn't apply to you in the lead up to 2016. He says, we always offer higher interest to lenders. Borrow more, use a part to repay previous debts, and the rest to pay for the current year's overspending. That sounds very much like what led us to the IMF program under your watch just before the 2016 elections.
Because if you allow me to answer your questions, I'm sure you will understand what I mean. I'm saying that what Kwaku Kwarteng is saying is correct, but that applies to the ruling NPP Akufo-Addo Bawumia government. It doesn't apply to the NDC. Under John Mahama in 2016, the budget deficit was 6.1%. Yes, somebody can say 6.1% was a bit high, but 6.1% is something that we can accommodate as a nation. What it means is that expenditure exceeded revenue, but it wasn't, above acceptable limits. The debt to GDP ratio in 2016, when President Mahama was leaving office, was 56%. That is within the acceptable threshold. And the fact is that Ghana was still servicing its debt in 2016. We have not defaulted, or we did not default on our debt obligations. So you cannot say that all governments are the same. You can't be talking about the political class here. You see, let's call a spade and not a digging tool. If your government has been reckless, be bold to call them out. Don't try and generalize and paint all of us with the same brush. Because President Mahama was able to service the debt of this country during the time that he was vice president and chairman of the economic management team, and during the time that he was president. We did not default on our debt obligations, and we did not record any budget deficit that was reckless. On the contrary,
but you recorded a budget deficit.
This government, Kwaku Kwarteng's government,
but
the
Sammy,
budget deficit.
You recorded a budget deficit nonetheless, and that's his point. Like you are living beyond your means.
But can you run an economy without a deficit? Who runs in this world today? Which African country runs an economy without a deficit?
But you're comparing yourself to blind folks. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is kin. That's his point exactly. That we are repeating a cycle.
Deficit. Every middle-income country will run a deficit. Even the advanced first world countries run deficits.
Because they have the economic fundamentals to accommodate that.
Deficit. Evans, you are either going to allow me to answer your questions or you will not allow me to answer your questions. So you take your time. I'm saying that under President Mahama, we did not spend recklessly. The deficit was within acceptable limits, and I've quoted it for you, 6.1% after 2016. Debt to GDP ratio, 56% within acceptable limits. There was nothing wrong with that. It is under this government that in 2018, contrary to the Fiscal Responsibility Act that they themselves passed and committed not to run a deficit of more than 5%. In 2018, if you look at the documents they submitted to the IMF in 2020 for the rapid credit facility of $1 billion, they concede that they recorded a budget deficit of 7.1% in 2018. That was before COVID. And that in 2019, they recorded a budget deficit of 7.5%. That was before COVID. So even before COVID, they were spending recklessly. And debt to GDP had increased from 56% to 64% in 2019, even before COVID. Now, this economic recklessness, supervised by Bawumia, reached a crescendo in 2020 when COVID struck, where we saw this reckless government using the pandemic as a pretext to engage in reckless, corrupt, election-related expenses. That is why in 2020 we recorded an unprecedented budget deficit of 15.7%, the highest in the sub-region. No government in the history of Ghana has recorded a budget deficit of 15.7% if we are talking about today's GDP terms.
Mr. Gyamfi, thank you very much. And that day is Sammy Gyamfi, the National Communications Officer of the NDC.